Alrighty, so today we're going to make this nice cartoony lava. And because we're making a nice cartoony lava, we're going to try to make it as efficient as possible. So it's actually a pretty lightweight material. That's always kind of the tricky thing with these animations, is that you're always trying to get them as efficient as possible. This is running at 1K. Obviously it'll run a bit faster at half that, but I've optimized it for the 1K. If I was going to run this at the 512, I would change this material so that, you know, I'd maybe soften up these edges a little bit, but can absolutely work at 512. And what we've also done is we've created a toggleable flow speed, and we've also created a toggleable crust thickness. And again, this wasn't optimized for this setting. I optimized it for 1K just visually. You know, so I was going for the look. I was looking at the 1K map. But, you know, again, you know, depending on the project that you're going to be doing this for, and how much processing speed you're planning on having, you can kind of plan ahead with the materials. And I was pretty happy with this. And, you know, and I'm going for this very stylized look, so it's kind of got this lava lamp feel to it, which is exactly what I wanted. So, why don't we switch over to Substance Designer and make a new substance. I'm going to File, New Substance, and we'll use the PBR template, and we'll call this Cartoon Lava. And I'll click OK. And that gives us a brand new graph to work with. Now, because we're making a lava, we're going to want an emissive. So I'm lazy. I'm gonna duplicate this. It'll save me having to fill in exactly one thing. And we're going to change this to an emissive. And that's sorted. And the other thing, I'm going to immediately move this up to 1K. If you want to work this in 512, feel free to do that. I'll kind of switch in between the two, but again, I'm optimizing for the 1K look. And one of the main reasons I'm doing that is, as far as the animation goes, you know, if it's going to run well at 1K, it's going to definitely run well at 512, and you know, you fix up the image a little bit by blurring some of the edges and you're done. So technically, as far as the animation goes, I prefer to work it at the, you know, like at whatever my optimum level is, and then if I have to fix the image up a little bit to, you know, depixelate it, you know, like blur out the pixels, if I'm toning it down, it's a lot easier to do. Anywho, let's start on building the actual material. I'm going to start with the underlying magma, so this stuff right here. And this is just some very simple animations, but at the same time, because we're trying to keep things efficient, this purlin noise that's happening under here is also what's driving a lot of the stuff that's happening up in the crust, because we're trying to keep things as little processing as possible is going to have your animation run at its optimal. I'm going to go into the library, and I'm going to get a purlin noise. Oops. And we're going to bring this way down, and I had it at 3. So the lower this number, sort of the bigger the actual image is. And this is going to be the largest that I need it at. And that's going to correspond to the height waves. You'll notice that if you look at it from the side, there's the magma has like waves. And that's what this purlin noise is going to do. The other thing I'm going to do to make it more efficient is I'm going to make it smaller. I don't really need any kind of detail from this. So I'm going to bring it to -1 on the parent size. And I'm going to get a blur node. And this node, because I don't want my, you know, I only want this one node to be small. I want everything it produces to be at parent size. So anything that's directly plugged into this node that I've made smaller, I want to make sure that I've set it not relative to input, which means that it's getting its size information from the previous node. I want its size to be relative to parent. And that immediately brings it back up to whatever this number is. So as I scale my material up and down, it's going to correspond properly. And this pretty much is the height and normal maps of our waves. So let's come back in here and get a height to normal node. And we're going to plug it into our waves. And I'm going to switch these around because that's how I like them. And then I'm going to plug this into my normals. So already we're beginning to see something. The next thing we want to do is create our actual magma. This normal right here is literally going to be lifting what we're going to create here up and down. So as far as the what I'm calling the waves, it's done. I mean, we'll plug it into the height map later on, but for right now, I'm going to leave it alone. And I'm going to continue building my actual magma. I'm going to get a transform 2D node. Actually, I'm going to get 2 of them. And I'm now going to start manipulating this purlin noise, which, oh, you know what I forgot to do? Oh, you know, we'll do it later. It's not animated right now. What we're going to do eventually is we're going to animate this disorder right here. And that's where we're going to start getting this movement from. I want to build the actual magma before we put in these very, very simple functions. It's going to be super simple. But that's what's going to run over time. And then since we have that time function on here, if we start using these transform nodes to take this movement and do slightly different things to it, we're getting a lot of bang for our buck because we don't have to make a separate FX map for every movement we want to make. It's all going to be running off of this purlin noise movement. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to plug the same thing in, and one of these I will make half as big, and the other one I'll do it twice. So we now have one slightly smaller and one much smaller version of the same thing. And now I'm just going to start to manipulate these maps a little bit to get more contrast. I want more black and more white. So we're going to just tighten them up. We'll start with just doing that and see where that brings us. And then we can blend them with a lighten. And just temporarily, to give us an idea of what's going on, I'm going to put this temporary gradient in here because I want to stick something in that color, and this is a grayscale, so I'm just going to temporarily switch that into a color. And again, we're going to kind of mess around with this a little bit, but it'll give us an idea of what that animation is going to look like. So I'm just going to slide this disorder slider, so I'm getting some movement in what's going to be my magma color, and at the same time, I'm also getting the whole thing to just go up and down, and it'll go even more up and down once we get that height map in there. Okay, so far so good. What I would like to do, just because I've done this and it just makes it for better color, you'll notice right now we don't have any pure whites and we don't have any pure blacks. And since I want to use this for a gradient map to do my color, and the gradient map runs from black to pure white, I want to be able to use the full range of that. So I'm, again, going to tighten up this result of these two overlaid movements. Again, so I have some black and some white, which will just give me a nicer color variation. And I had a blur also. I'm looking at my notes in here too. So I'm going to adjust this again so it works with this blur, which I just had it set at intensity 10. So I'm single clicking on the levels, and I'm adjusting this so that I get some nice variations in the tonality here. And that looks a lot more like magma. It was looking pretty sharp before. So we've got these really flowy shapes. And why don't we work on our color? Since we've got it plugged in already, we might as well. And so we can pick some nice lava colors. And maybe a nice yellow. We can just, I want to keep it pretty simple. We'll just kind of put a little variation in there. That looks pretty nice. So you can fool around with that and get that underlying magma how you want it. And I'm also going to plug in the same thing into our emissive. Now, you'll see I plugged it into the emissive, but I'm not getting any emission. And the reason for that is when we created this graph with the pre-imported template of output nodes, emissive wasn't in there. So it hasn't been calculated into the renderer yet. And I can do that in one of two ways. I can view all outputs in 3D view, which is going to just completely redo them, all of them, and it just globally did all of them again, and in doing so it added the emissive. But you can also right-click on the individual node and just click View in 3D View, and then actually assign it where you want it to go. And since we are going to be working with heights, we want to make sure that our material defaults are doing height. It's by default, it always opens up to 0, so you want to make sure that this height scale is set to 1, otherwise your heights will just not show up in the renderer. Right, so let's take a look. We can now come back to our disorder and move that around, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. That looks like some very, very shiny magma. Now, what we haven't done yet, since we're doing the normals at the same time, is we might as well get another height to normal and combine it with the underlying waves. I'm going to take a look at what I had in my settings here. I had this one set to 34.5 because it's going to have, we're going to start blending these things, and I really we need to ramp these up because they're going to be competing with each other. I like that. And then we're going to make a normal for our actual magma, the stuff going on top of it. And this I had set to 32.75. Again, the exact numbers you use for here aren't, that's completely how you want it. But the important thing is I want these underlying things kind of strong. And I'm going to use a blur node in here as well to blur down this normal a little bit. And that's what I had set in my settings. And let's combine these two guys with an overlay blend and see what that looks like. Yeah. So again, I'm just manually moving this right now, which gives me a preview of what the animation is going to look like. Let's also see what the normals are doing in here. I want to watch this. Yeah, so we have waves. I mean, it's doing a lot of moving around, and that's exactly what I want. I just kind of want this undulating, thick liquid. Might as well make a frame, and we will be adding to these, and we'll call this our crust. Oh, so no, that's not our crust. That's our magma. Sorry. Crust is what we're going to be doing next. I'm going to make a separate thing for these guys. I'm just going to call it waves. Okay, so now we're going to make the crusty stuff that goes on top. And this is far and away the more complicated part of this entire material, and honestly, it's not that complicated compared to some of the stuff we've done before. First thing I want to do is get a shape. And I'm going to use a bell. And the scale I had set was 0.87. I don't know how I came up with that, why it's not 1, I don't know. I spent a lot of time just kind of tweaking this stupid thing to get it exactly how I wanted, because I really wanted that super stylized look, so I messed around with it a bunch. And what I'm going to try to do with this levels node here is tighten up these edges, make it a harder edge. That's probably good. And next, I'm going to get a warp because this right here doesn't look very much like something that would come from lava. And we're going to have to mess around with it some. But what I want to have happen with these things is I want it to move. I mean, the key with making lava is you really want kind of everything moving at once. And the movements have to be kind of related, but at the same time, they can't all be moving in the same direction doing exactly the same thing. So that's why we're using all these transform nodes to take the same movement and just have it do slightly different things. And it gives the impression of the whole surface kind of wiggling around. But at the same time, you're not really spending an awful lot of processing speed doing a whole bunch of different movements. So let's get back to doing what we're doing. I'm going to take the movement of my magma, and I'm going to warp this shape by that movement. So the warp is actually, again, animated. And you can set this number to whatever you want this number to be, but I had set the intensity to, well, I had 4.97, which is pretty close to 5. And what it's doing for me here is it's creating these, it's making it look more like a shape that would be involved with lava. But it's really very round. And again, I came to this conclusion after having made the material using just this shape. And then I came back to make it less round because it still looked very patterned when I applied it to the FX map, which we're going to be building in a minute. So we're just going to get out ahead of this and get a couple of transform nodes and do some different things with it. Uh-oh. If I'm going to be using this, I have to change this transform node to not tile. Because I just want to create these different versions of it, and then we're going to pile them all on top of each other to make a brand new shape. So I'm going to come into my transform node, and I'm going to go into my tiling mode right here. And it's currently set relative to input. I'm going to set this to absolute, which means that it is completely separated out from either the parent size or the input size, and it's a standalone thing. And you'll notice that if I have it relative to input or relative to parent, this tiling mode is actually grayed out. The only place where you can do something about it is in absolute because it's standalone, and we're going to do it no tiling. And that problem just went away. And we can do the same thing here. And I'm going to blend these two shapes together using a lighten blend. And then we're going to get another blend node, and we're going to take the results of this and blend it to the results of the warp, the original one, and we're going to do another lighten blend. This is actually a more efficient way of daisy chaining it, because you can daisy chain it a bunch of different ways. I found that from a processing point of view, this is more efficient to do these guys as a separate one and then to apply it to the original. So I'm going to double click on the original, and then I'm going to start with this top transform node. I've just clicked on it, a single click on it, and I'm looking at this final image, but it's allowing me to manipulate this other shape to create something that's not quite so round. And I'm going to single click on this next one, which is currently exactly the same thing as the original, and we can change its shape, change its size, move it around, and maybe get something that's, more irregular in its shape. Maybe even pull it out a little bit. And because it's not tiling, I can actually do this. Now, I want to be careful that I'm not coming up on the edges, I'm not going over the edges, because the result is going to be able to be tiled. And you can check that, you can see what it's going to look like tiled by coming into this 2D view and hitting the space bar. So we don't have, because you don't want any weird lines where it comes up on an edge, because it's not tiled, it'll cut off. So that looks pretty good. And that's going to be our basic sort of lava chunk shape. And this is the beginning of the shape that we're going to eventually feed into an effects map that's going to animate it for us. The problem I'm having with this, though, is that it's pretty solid, and I want to break it up. I want to put some cracks in it. And to do that, I'm going to get one of my favorites, which is Cells 3. I think one of these is a Legacy. Okay, that's the original. The other one I just messed around with, did something else with. And I have this set to 20, so I'm kind of making them kind of on the large side. And I'm matching these cracks basically to the scale of what I'm doing here. So again, that's not a hard and fast number. That's just an aesthetic choice I made of how I wanted to break this up. So if you want less but larger cracks, you can do that by setting this scale. Right now, they're really fine. And I'm going to sort of darken them up a little bit by using a levels node. And we're going to get another warp. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take this magma and we're going to warp them against the magma. So these things are also going to be animated on whatever the magma speed we have set in, because we're going to make that adjustable. It's going to affect these in exactly the same way. And now we're going to get a blend node, and we're going to blend these onto this. Because this is pure white in here, I can get away with doing this. This background, we're dealing grayscales. This background is by default black if I don't put anything in. And I'm just cutting out from the white this mask. There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. This is just how I happen to do this. You could probably also overlay this on top of here without the mask. Oops. And do a darken blend. That's probably going to give us exactly the same result. It's probably conceptually simpler. More than one way to skin a cat in Substance. The one final thing that I want to deal with here is I got a lot of large white flat areas, which isn't going to really work for me because that's not what lava looks like. So I need to add some chunkiness to this, specifically for the normal map and, also somewhat for the color. But again, I want this to look like, I want it to move along with the magma. So I'm going to kind of do the same trick here. I'm going to get a transform 2D node. And we're going to take this result here, our final magma result, and we're going to make it smaller. We might want to make it even smaller, but let's see how this looks. And we're going to kind of rough up what's going on in here as far as the flat white areas. So I'm going to get another blend node, and we are going to want a levels node because we are going to need to adjust that. And we're going to use a darken blend to kind of undulate that a bit more. I did not mean to double click, so I'm double clicking on that image. I'm single clicking on the levels that I want to adjust. And we're just giving ourselves more of a variated surface. So you can see the difference between here and here. It's not a giant difference, but as far as normal maps, and well, we're not going to use it for the height map, but certainly as far as normal maps and color gradients go, it's going to make for a much more interesting image. So that's our basic shape that we're going to use in the effects map done. So I'm going to organize myself a little bit better here. I'm going to make a frame for this, and I'm going to call it crust shape. And we can make a sub thing here, and we can call this crust cracks. And now we're going to get into making the effects map that's actually going to drive our crust, and we're going to borrow a snippet off of what we make here because it's only going to be the basic snippet, and we're going to stick it in there. I just didn't want to have to do it twice. which is why I didn't do that animation before. So let's get an effects map, and we'll plug this in. We're going to change our effects map to be grayscale. I'm going to right-click on my effects map and edit effects map. You know what? Actually, let's go back to our lava. I'm double-clicking on the graph, and I'm going to make my input parameter first, because what we're going to be dealing with here is the flow speed. I'm intentionally leaving a space there. I'm going to copy it. It's going to put in my underscore for me, and this way I save typing in the label because I am lazy. And I'm going to set my minimum at -5, and I'm going to set my maximum at 5. And I don't know, I'll set the default at, well, let's leave it at 1 for now, see what happens. Because I know it's going to be, I know it's fast. We're going to have to slow it down in the effects map. But by putting a minimum that's a negative number and a maximum that's a positive number, we're actually going to allow it to flow both ways, because when it's being in the negative numbers, it's going to flow in the opposite direction than when it's in the positive numbers. So that's a very quick and easy way of having it go in any direction. So we've got our flow speed parameter done. It's a float 1. And I'm going to come back into my effects map, and I'm going to start building it. Now, the way the effects map work is that the more quadrants I have going down here, the smaller my individual iterations of that shape are going to be. And again, this means that you're going to make an aesthetic decision as to how small you want this stuff to get. I'm going to add a quadrant here, and you know what? I think I'm going to have them all the same. We're going to keep them large. So we're going to keep this as the root. Let's get an iteration node in here. We're probably going to want to be able to adjust that. And this is going to determine how many examples we're going to get in each quadrant. And we're going to set this as the root. For the moment, I'm not going to make these guys. Because we're going to have 4 individual quadrants here, and they're all going to be identical to this first one. And first, I want to build my functions. First things first, let's get this to, we got to input image 0. Okay. This is plugged in to input image. Oh, because I forgot to set the pattern. Okay. Yeah, you can have it input image 0 all you want, but if you haven't set the pattern, it's not going to show it. There we go. And it's appearing in this first quadrant. So the quadrants are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. And therefore, it's showing up here by itself. But I'm not going to worry about that right now. Let's make a couple more iterations. So we'll see if it's randomizing. And right now, it looks like it's just getting lighter and lighter. But that's because they are literally piled up on top of each other. And 3 should be enough to see what's going on here. And let's start building our function. We're going to want to change the pattern offset, and we're going to want to change the pattern rotation. Rather than going into each individual one, which is kind of a drag, we're going to put everything on this first function. The way Substance looks at these functions is it starts at the top and moves down. So we can assign variables in this first line, and it will deal with them down the line successfully. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to create an empty function. Now, when I do this, the first thing I want to make sure is that the actual color luminosity is taken care of. And that's always taken care of last in the sequence. So before we forget, why don't we just go ahead and do that? I'm going to get a constant float 1. I'm going to put that in here. And since we're not going to be changing our color luminosity at all in this, I'm going to get a sequence node. And we're going to set this as our output, and this 1 is going to be the very last thing in whatever kind of chain we put up here. So let's take a look at our quadrant. The first thing down the list is our pattern offset. So why don't we take care of that first? So I'm going to come back into my luminosity, and I'm going to get a couple of random nodes, because I'm going to have two random numbers because I want my x and my y to be two different numbers. I'm going to get a constant float 1, and we're going to generate two different random numbers between 0 and 1. Whatever number you put in here, it's going to generate a random number between 0 and this number. And we're going to need a float 2 result. So we're going to need to vector a float 2. So each one of these gets vectored into the float 2, and we will set this as our output node. But we haven't seen any change here. Oh, because, well, two reasons. First, we forgot to do something very important, and that is to set a new variable. That's like key. I don't know what I was thinking. Now, in a set variable, you're not going to get a drop-down list. You're actually assigning a variable. So I'm going to create this pattern offset, and I'm going to copy it. And now I'm going to come back into my effects map. I'm going to go into my pattern offset. I'm going to create an empty function. And I'm going to come in here. I'm going to get my float 2 variable. But that pattern offset that I just created by doing a set does not appear on this drop-down list. Any variable you set will not appear on a drop-down. You have to manually put it in. And that's why I copy it, because it is a unique identifier, and you do want it exactly the same, and I am notoriously butterfingered when I type. So I'm going to right-click and set this as my output node. Now I've got some variation in these little islands of crust. So instead of being all piled up on top of each other, they've now, each one of them, so iteration 1, it's been assigned a random position. Then it goes iteration 2, it assigns it a random position. Iteration 3, it assigns it a random position. And so if we move these up, we're going to get continually more and more put into random positions. But they're all exactly the same alignment, and that's what we're going to change next. So that rotation is also what we're going to set in this first function here. And you know what? I think it's time to animate this, because that is actually, the rotation is actually completely animated. I wanted to do it separately because we're actually going to be adding this animation into the offset. If we set the timer directly into these random nodes, it's going to start at 0. So they're going to start lined up, which is why I did it this way, because I don't want it to start like perfectly square, which is what exactly it'll do if you plug the timer directly into the random nodes here for the pattern offset. So I like to set them like this and then add into it the animation. So let's get our variable speed. And we are now getting a flow speed in our drop-down because that's something we created in the graph. We're going to need at least one multiplication node, and we're going to need our $time function as well. Oh, I just changed the wrong one. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, so we've got our flow speed, we've got our actual timer, and we want to multiply them. And this will give us the adjusted timer speed. However, before we do this, just because I've tested it and I know, this is going to be really, really fast because we've got our input variable set to, these are all numbers over 1. And it makes it easier for people to use it because rather than going through 0.01, 0.02, that's kind of a drag. So it gives people nice big numbers that they can use for their sliders, but it also makes it too fast. But it's so simple to fix that we're just going to get another multiplication node, and we're going to get another constant, and I'm going to set this to 0.01. which is going to really slow it down. And again, depending on how much you want to slow it down, you can make this number bigger or smaller. And that's what I'm going to plug into as my multiplier for the time. And this lets me make nice big movements on the slider and have the time and have the actual animation work nicely for me. And then all I really need to do is to add this timer number to these original offsets. I'll get 2 of those. And we'll just do this for each one. And while we're at it, this is the snippet I was talking about that we're going to actually copy. And then we're going to come into our waves. We're going to get into this purlin noise and this disorder in here. I'm going to create an empty function. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to paste that. And I'm going to set this as the output node. So now this magma is going to be moving according to exactly the same timer we have going on in here. So again, I'm double clicking on this. I'm going to come back into this one. And now the only thing we really need to deal with is the rotation. We kind of got off track there. Sorry about that. The rotation is super easy because again, it's flowing off of this timer, and I want it to be related, but I don't want these things to spin around at the same speed that they're moving. So I'm going to get another multiplication node, and I'm going to get another constant. I settled on half the speed, but again, you can have this rotation be whatever sort of relation you want to your timer. I'm going to take this result, and a rotation is a float 1, so I can go ahead and set this immediately into my new pattern rotation. So I'm copying that. I'm going to come back into my rotation. I'm going to create an empty function. I'm going to get my float, and then I'm going to paste my name in here and set this as my output node. And we can come back to our original and actually hook it up in here. So I've run out of sequence space here. I'm going to get another sequencer. So first we're going to do our pattern offset. Then we're going to do our pattern rotation. And then finally we're going to have our luminosity remain at 1. You know, I'm looking at this, and I mean, the reason the rotation hasn't changed right now is because we have it directly on the timer, and this is a perfect example of what I was talking about before. I think I want it to start offset. I don't like it starting like this. So I'm going to go back, and before we copy this out, oh, I didn't really need to do that. Let's do the same thing here that we did up here. I'm going to copy one of these, and we're going to get another plus, and we're going to add it. Because again, you can multiply, timer starts at 0. You can multiply 0 but by whatever you want to multiply it by, and it's still going to be 0, which is why it does that. So if you want it to not be 0, you can make it not 0 by adding or subtracting anything to it. And I would rather it start like this than all lined up. So I'm happier with this. Let's go back and make 3 more duplicates of this. Oop, I made an extra. So what happens when you talk and click at the same time? I'm going to lower these down a little bit now that we've got all 4 quadrants going. Yeah, so that's the basic effects map. One of the things that I do want to do to it before we go on is to mess around with the global alpha. I do want it to be slightly wider than this. 2 is going to be probably too much. But I think that's better. And this is a nice way of getting this to do more or less what you want. Now, we're going to need to use this as a mask, and obviously this isn't really suitable to that. What I'm trying to do here with the actual effects map The results of this I want kind of as my baseline, but I want anything that I want animated by this effects map has to happen in here. So if I had made these islands and then put the crust on top of it after the effects map, that crust is going to stand still. It's not going to move with the effects map. And that's great, but sometimes it means you can't get quite the tonality that you want for your masks directly from the effects map. And very often I find I'll have, a few different levels that I'll set off of this one that I'm going to use for the various things that I need it to use for, but they're all moving off of this same animation and it's all exactly the same, and it's just different tonalities of the same thing. So this is going to work for my basic height. I'm going to want one that's a little bit more white, where I'm cutting out, where there's more opacity. Probably like that. We can adjust it later. And then I also am going to need an inverted version of this. We'll actually adjust these maps to what we really need them to be once we get to where we're going, but I just want to get these nodes out here. Now, I'm not doing it off of this one. I'm doing it off of the original. And now what I'm going to make with this one is a mask that is going to mask out everything except for my magma. So anything that's remotely not white in here has to go to black. And that's going to make a nice mask that I can actually split out the lava versus the crust. Okay. This is probably the most involved bit in the whole material that we're doing here. The color, we're going to be using gradient maps to get the color. I mean, we already got one for the magma. We're going to need one for the crust as well. But here's the problem. I'm not happy with what I'm getting directly out of this effects map. And, we are kind of limited because of the stuff we talked about before where, I'm obliged to put certain things on this end of the effects map in order to get them to animate. But sometimes doing that means that they don't come in as strongly as you'd like, and tonalities in your maps aren't really what you want. The information's here, so I'm getting all, most of my cracks. I mean, it's there, but as far as color, this isn't the map I want. Now, we can change certain things using levels. So if we're dealing with height maps and masks, that works fine. But the color is, it's a very sensitive thing. So in that case, the levels node really isn't going to work because it's washing out so much. If I get the dark the way I want it to be right here, it's washing out information up here. I get the most information coming out from my original effects map. So this is really the one I want to use. I just want to change it in some pretty radical ways in order to get the colors I want. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use a gradient map, but we're going to not turn it into colors. We're going to keep it as a grayscale. And then once we've adjusted this into what we want to use for our color mask, then we're going to pump it into a new gradient map that's going to actually assign colors to it. So right now, all we're doing is assigning tonalities. But it works exactly the same way. So let's take a look at what we want to see here. I want to see my, my quote-unquote islands more or less the same. I mean, I do want like heavy areas where it's like almost completely black, but I want this to be more or less all kind of looking like one piece, because right now it's just very choppy. So I want to bring these grays in here up, and I kind of want to make things a little bit more interesting throughout. I'm going to create a couple of little extra ones here because I want to be able to pick up pure black or pure white to assign to various areas. I'm going to get a black in here, and let's see what happens as we slide this down. So, like, I'm getting some, you know, like the cracks that would be normally covered up elsewhere are showing up. And we're going to just create a bunch of bands that are going to do what we want. Right, so this gray area in here, I'm guessing it's probably like that. Now, the closer we bring these together, the sharper that line becomes. All right, let's start with that and see where that goes. I'm pretty sure we're going to come back and readjust that. But if we compare it now to this map here, I mean, this is starting to look like maybe we can make some lava colors happen. Whereas this is kind of all flat and very gentle. And again, I'm going for that seriously cartoony look, so that's kind of where I'm at with this. And now I can get another gradient and actually start assigning colors to it. Now remember, this area in here is going to be actually cut out, and we're going to see this. So I'm actually only making the colors for these black areas. I'm not worrying about the color that's happening in here. Yeah, okay. I mean, I'm really obsessive with these stupid things, and I can spend hours doing it, but you get the idea. You know, and the simpler you keep the gradient, I think for this, the better it works. You know, the closer you bring these points together, the sharper those lines become. So, you know, make it what you want it to look like. But for these inside areas here, you know, I like these sharp cracks, but I don't want these inside areas too sharp. So we now have a bunch of different colors. Let's get organized. I'm going to put a frame around this, and we'll call this, I don't know, crust. It's the final result. And we can just blend our colors to see what's going on. So we have this mask that has the magma areas in white, so that's going to be our foreground. So I'm going to take my magma color, and I'm going to run this color as the background. And now we have our basic color, and we're going to use it. We're going to continue to use exactly the same thing for our color and our emissive. And we've got an animation on it, so let's see how this looks when we publish it out to Substance. I mean, obviously we've got a lot of work left to do on it, but let's see how it looks wiggling around. Before we do that, I want to, we've got everything hooked up. Yep, flow speed is hooked up, and we are good to go. So let's go to our package, and we're going to publish it out. This is the first time that I've done it. We can leave it in liquids, and we'll save the archive file to the same place. We can switch over to Substance Player, and we're going to open Cartoon Lava. All right, now what you need to do is make sure, because I already had this open, just like the renderer in Substance Designer, if you want heights to show, you have to go Materials, Default, Edit, and make sure your height is set to whatever you want your height to be set in. Now, I can already see an issue with what's going on here in that I think my magma is moving too slowly. So I'm going to switch back here. I'm going to come back into my waves. Actually, yeah, we're going to have to do all of them, I think. And we're going to change this number to 0.1. I think it was a mistake in my notes. And we'll also come in here. And we have to change each one of these guys too. And let's see what that looks like now. So we'll come back into the player. We'll reload it. Yeah, I'm happier with that. And our flow speed, you know what? I think I want that magma moving faster. Let's change this to 0 for the moment. I'm going to ever so slightly move this up. You know what? I think it's moving okay. Wow, that's a really small number. So let's fudge these numbers a little bit more. What we're having going on here is this magma is, I think we want to slow the crust down. I think it's probably easier to slow this down. So just will make sure I know which one I'm on. The first one. Okay, so I did change all of that. I think what I'll do is I will change, we're going to switch it around. Let's see what happens if we make the islands at 0.01. Yeah, that's better. That's more the speed of the movement I want. So, I mean, obviously we got a lot to worry about, you know, as far as heights and normals and things go here, but the islands are moving at a pace that I think is working with the magma underneath. And if we look at it at 1K, looks all right. I mean, you can see how the animation slowed down a little bit. But I think it's still within appropriate bounds. And, you know, everybody's computer is going to be different because it really depends on the kind of video card you have. But, yeah, I think we're good. I like what's going on here. So let's come back here and start working on some of our other nodes. Because right now all we've got is like the color of the emissive and half a normal. And at this point it's really just a question of hooking these things up with the masks. So I'm going to make a frame. Now the normals, right now all we have is normals for the magma underneath. And ditto the height. So that's going to be the next thing we'll have to go. That's the next thing we're going to have to deal with. So we've got our original effects map. Looking at this, you know, tough call. I'm going to go with this one first for the heights. We may not. I don't know why I made this map. Anyway, we'll play it by ear. From now on, I'm not looking at my notes because my notes are actually confusing me at this point. I want to make a normal. I'm going to make the normal off of this, I think, because it's got the most information. I've got some nice undulations in here. I'm also going to use a height to normal. And we're going to use a blend. And the way we have it set up is that our magma goes on top. And we'll use our mask. And we'll replace the normal. So now, you know, it's not all waves. Still looking a little flat over here, but again, that's something that everybody's going to adjust themselves because at this point everybody's is looking very different from what I've got here. Right, so let's make our normal frame a little bigger. We can add to it. Next we've got the height. I am not going to use all of the, I really want my height map to be pretty simple. So rather than using this one with more stuff on it, I want to use this one with less stuff on it. And we're probably going to have to adjust it. For right now, I'm just going to plug it in here. Because what I just want to make sure it's not giving me all kinds of weird little jagged. That looks pretty good, actually. Because if the map is too rough, you get like these weird spiky things, like all little points. So you want to keep your height map nice and smooth. But we are going to need to combine it with our magma, our waves height rather. We're not going to do height for the magma. We're going to just let the normals handle that, but I am going to combine the wave height with the actual sort of island height. And I think I'm going to probably want to adjust it a little bit because we're going to be matching up to completely different maps. So by putting this levels node in here, I'm giving myself the option of doing that. Oh, you know, and I did it backwards again because again, the waves are going to be the ones that are the white areas in the mask here, so we want them on top. And then on the bottom, did the wrong connector. And then on the bottom, we're going to want the height that we're using from here. Yeah, it looks pretty good. I don't know if I'm happy with the normals, but I'm pretty happy with the heights. So let's see how that looks when we publish it out. All right, so that's at 512. Again, you know, if we just put a little softening on this, that would totally work as a material. You know, because that's nice and flowy down here, and we've just softened that up. So but it animates really well. And at 1K, it still animates okay. But I think it's looking pretty. And the heights are kind of doing what they need to do. Again, I think these normals are a little bit flat, but we can take care of that. Yeah, so anyway, decide how you want to do it, and we can come back to substance and keep working on it. So that's our heights taken care of. Next, we're going to have roughness, and we're going to use the same idea. We might as well hook up our mask. Now, for the roughness, you know, I was debating about this. I ended up going with kind of the shinier bits on the top idea. Again, we're going to be able to split up our magma and our island, so I'm only talking about the crusty bits right now. It's an aesthetic choice. Honestly, I did it because it's kind of like, you know, volcanic glass, so, you know, the top bits I'm keeping pretty shiny, but obviously not that shiny. But I am going to base it off of this inverted map. I'm going to get a levels node, and we can take a look at our results here. Oh, I did it backwards again. So let's do something with these levels. So I'm evening it up by bringing this down because you know, I want to bring down the contrast, and the only way I can do it is by making these other things a little bit darker, but I don't want it that shiny. So then I'm just going to bring the whole thing up. And for our magma, we'll get another levels node that will let us do the same thing. So we can, you know, we can independently adjust the roughnesses on these. Yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with the magma. Maybe even it out a bit. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. And then, where are we? I'm pressing F to focus on that. If you're far out like that and you want to get back in real quick, you can just press F and it'll focus on whatever node you have highlighted. I think this could use some work. So I'm working now on the crusty bits. All right. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. You know, that's very flat, but we'll take care of that. But as far as the roughnesses go, I think I'm okay with that. So we'll draw a frame around that. And I think I want to add some metallic to it. I kind of like the idea of having some metal in through here. So I'm going to pick a map for that. I think I'm going to go with this one, but I'm going to put it into a levels node because I know I'm going to want to mess around with it. I'm going to double click on that. So I'm going to see the results. Now I want the most metal in these highest areas. So maybe like that. And I'll remember this eventually. I'm putting that in the background because our magma is in the foreground. You know, actually, I think it's pretty good like this because I don't want any metallic in my magma. I'm going to leave that alone. So if you want to put metallic in your magma, you can go ahead and repeat this process here. But I think I'm just going to plug this in like that. And that, you know, that makes that black really black too. I like that. All right, so the only thing we have left here to fix is do something about these normals, which I hate. And that's because we're getting these flat bits that are coming from in here. Yeah, okay, you know what? I got off my notes as we were making this material, and rather than waste your time with it, I'm going to come back after I've actually figured out how to fix it, because it's going to be a different fix than I originally had. So I'll see you in a couple. Okay, sorry about that. I figured out a way of kind of handling the problem nodes causes a chain reaction, so we're going to go through it together. I also upped the warp a little bit up here. I made this a little warpier, but again, that's a personal taste thing. And so rather than it being set to the original 1, I have it now at 1.77. The only way that I could figure of fixing this problem, which I was kind of hoping to avoid, but sometimes you can't, is I'm going back to my effects map, and I'm going to bring down this global opacity, and that's going to get rid of some of these white areas, but it's going to change our color maps too. So right now, the only thing I'm looking at is what my normals are doing here. I don't want any of those flat areas. I'm correcting for flat. So where are we now? The basic island shapes are all still there. So it's really just a question of now going back into this color map, this gradient map, and adjusting this back to how you want it. Or, you know what, before we do that, let's take a look at what's going on in this black and white map, which is not how we want it. I want this a much more even looking tone. So right now we're back to having these dark gray areas. I forget what my original colors are. Let's take a look. Yeah, I think I like that. It's pretty funky. So yeah, the important thing is that the normals work better now, because you're getting we're getting information in here that we weren't getting in before, and that's really what I was going for. I mean, what you do with the colors really is your business, but that was looking weird, the fact that it was like flat like that. So yeah, you know, the fact that we had gone off of the script with my original material, you know, means that I had to adjust other things. So, you know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we saved it in the end, and sorry for the trouble. I hope it wasn't confusing. But I think we're pretty much there. Let's publish this out and see what it looks like animated. Yeah, it's pretty nice. want to try one more thing before we close this video out, because I think the only thing that's keeping it from looking really super cool at 512 is maybe a high quality blur. I don't know if that's the answer, but it's certainly worth taking a look at. Let's bring this down to 512. Oh, and we also forgot to do the crust thickness, which is pretty easy. But by kind of fudging these lines a little bit, I mean, it's a different look, sure, but it's also, what, like a half or a quarter the size. I suck at math. Let's publish that out before we change that crust thickness and see what this looks like at 512. But that's the way that I would change it. I mean, you don't have to just do it to the color. You can, there's certain maps that you can kind of make it less harsh, and it's a little bit more forgiving with the lower res. Yeah, that already looks better. So, you know, depending on what your needs are, you can kind of mess around with that aspect of things, and it'll give you a, you know, much lighter weight material. You know, you're giving things up, but it can still look okay. And if it still looks good here, we might as well keep it. No, I don't know. I like it crisp. So I'm going to get rid of that, but that is a way of doing it. So before we close out, let's take care of our crust thickness. Now the way we have, I just want to make sure that it's still according to what I have. Yeah, I've got black as my lightest color. In fact, I'm going to see what happens if I do that. No, I'm going to do that. So that means that the lighter I go with this map here, the darker that color is going to get. And that's really the extent of how we're going to do the crust thickness, because we're going to take this map and we're going to create this levels node here. And as this slider gets moved up, it just gets thicker and thicker and thicker. So that's like the easiest one in the world. Let's make our input parameter. And that's a float 1, and it's running from 0 to 1, which is exactly what this levels node is doing. So our level out low is crust thickness. And we forgot to set the parameter in here, which is why it went ahead and did that. I'll set it at, I don't know, 0.5. There we go. So we're going to publish it out one more time to see the final result. And that'll be that. So we can adjust our flow speed. Now, 5 seems really high. Let's make that a number between 1 and -1. I think that'll simplify everybody's life. You don't really want it going any faster than that. Come back in here, and we're going to adjust our minimums and our maximums. So -1 and 1. And we'll republish. We'll refresh. Yeah, it just makes it easier to deal with, I think. That slider, there's just too much room on that slider. And then the crust thickness, we can adjust here. So yeah, this looks pretty different from the lava that I made for the test. But, you know, honestly, they come out different every time because there's so many touchy-feely parts to it. But the methodology is going to stay the same. You can do this however you want. You get your... you know, this is a key mask here, this gradient map here, and, you know, you adjust your gradient. You know, gradient maps are the thing that take the most time, so you can do, and that's really the secret sauce, because every detail that you have here tonally, you can pick up with a color here. So depending on how much time you want to spend with these things, you can actually get some really intricate colors. And I think that's it. So, I hope this has helped, and I'll see you in the next video.